back to Fantasy Football Weather Guys. We got a doozy for you today. I'm your host, Colin Golzinski, and we are the Fantasy Football Weather Guys, where we are quantifying weather risks in sports. I'm here with meteorologist Mike Ventris and Sean Bratton. How are you?
Happy Saturday morning. Good, doing well. It's a beautiful morning out there. Good weather out here in the East Coast.
Yeah, same here. It's actually feeling like fall. We got a little fire going last night. It was in the 40s. It's my favorite time of year. I love fall weather, so we kind of stayed in, watched a scary movie, enjoyed the fall weather.
What'd you watch? Hocus Pocus? Sean, you got a little scared with that one?
To be honest, I've never actually seen that movie. I get a lot of...
Shut up.
I've never seen Hocus Pocus.
Wow.
We actually watched
It's a shame.
Chapter 2.
Okay.
It's
a creepy clown.
I watched the original the new one that came out in 2017, and I never saw Chapter 2. So my wife and I, Katie, we ended up watching the Chapter 2 last night, which was, up to this point, it's a 3-hour movie, but is amazing.
I literally turned that movie off, the first one. After the first scene of watching a clown pull a little kid down to the sewer, I'm like, I'm done. That's it for me. I'm not watching this crap. Yeah.
Well, why don't we talk about other things then that are important, that excite us, and that's weather and football, right?
Yeah.
This week, we have an event, and I get to say some fun things like Cyclone, bombgenesis. So it is the San Francisco Colts game at San Francisco on Sunday night, and it's an extreme. And we haven't seen something like this really, since 2013 maybe with the event, but...
Well, speaking about like actual rain events here, like we saw one a couple years ago with the 49ers again and the Washington Redskins, remember?
Oh, that's right.
That was big rain. It wasn't big wind. And the one game that we could talk about, it comes close to this one, there was a weather delay. So we'll get to all of that here in good time.
Yep. So why don't we just get into it? Mike or Sean, why don't you take us about the forecast, what we're seeing, and then we'll get into the game.
All right, so I'm sharing my screen right now, and it shows our weather table. And you can see on the weather table here, there's all the games this week from the given slate of NFL games. And we have two games that are not green. Green is essentially suggests that there's no real weather impacts we're worried about. The first game is the Atlanta-Miami Dolphins game. That's a caution. It's orange, but we're not really expecting any significant impacts there. There's some scattered convection. We're not worried about it. So feel free to play any players in that game, especially during our big bipocalypse week this week, especially redraft leagues where people are scrambling to find any guys. Feel free to play those, any teams here. The one game we're going to focus about is this Indianapolis Colts at 49ers matchup. And you can see on the weather table here, it's red. And that means...
We got red.
Extreme. I like to call this the code red event, right? It means that there's impacts, right? Yeah. I mean, this is our first real extreme this season. We usually get a couple of these if we're lucky during a season, but here we go. Code red event, bombgenesis.
Yeah. Mike, what does that mean? We've been hearing that term a lot. Bomb cyclogenesis or bomb cyclone. What does that mean? We're seeing that in the news. People are talking about it. What does that mean?
So this is a term that's been really, really popular as of late, especially as Twitter has grown in weather Twitter world. There's this hashtag weather Twitter. It's a very popular thing. People love to get weather information on social media, Twitter, and bomb cyclone is one of those buzz terms. It's very analogous to like the polar vortex. If people hear the polar vortex, say, oh, what's going on? Bomb cyclone is just like that. It's this term is derived from this meteorological word called bombgenesis. And this is a popular term that meteorologists have been using for decades. And it's essentially just when a mid-latitude cyclone rapidly intensifies by a metric of dropping 24 millibars, which is a measure of pressure in the atmosphere, over 24 hours. So it's a millibar per hour, essentially.
So hold on. For us not weather nerds, it sounds like what you're saying is it's a pretty big weather event that the pressure goes pretty low.
A strong low pressure system that gets very strong over a short period of time.
Yeah. And what does mid-cyclone mean, Mike, just for us that don't understand what the heck you just said?
Sorry, so a mid-latitude low is just a low-pressure system in the mid-latitudes where we live. Where the United States is in the mid-latitudes, Europe's in the mid-latitudes, Asia. You look at the tropical-like cyclones, right? You go down into the tropics, you have tropical cyclones. Those are like hurricanes or tropical storms. So
would this show a pattern? Like if you looked at a weather map or something, would it show the same type of almost looking like a hurricane concept or tropical?
It's a much bigger system, right? Tropical cyclones are smaller events compared to these mid-latitude storms. So anyway, To go into this particular storm, the storm is predicted to go from 988 millibars, which is a modest low pressure system. This is 2 p.m. today, and by Sunday morning or midnight Eastern time here, 10 hours later, it's going to be down to 949 millibars. So this is around a 40 millibar drop within 12 hours. That like robustly satisfies the criteria for bombgenesis.
Yeah, I mean, and this is going to be, and with that, typically when we have these low pressure systems, when we say low pressure, the deeper the low pressure is, or the lower the number of millibars, essentially the central low pressure, the stronger typically the storm is. And with that, we have a lot of rain, and with this one, we're also going to have a lot of wind. So we do anticipate, as Mike mentioned, this to make landfall over the Pacific North Coast, the Northwest Pacific, and Northern California. Saturday, at some point, we expect that rain to start filtering into the Bay Area. Remember, that's where Levi Stadium is. That's where the 49ers play. On Saturday, those conditions will start to deteriorate pretty rapidly over the Bay Area. And this is not just a few-hour event. We expect rain to persist over several hours, if not days, in this area. And Mike and I were just actually talking this before the shoot. There's certain portions on the northern half of California that could get over 6 to 12 inches of rain.
Yeah, big event. This is like this is not just a football event, right? This is a societal event for people living in North California. Like, the amount of rain that could fall here could trigger a number of things. We could potentially see mudslides in some of the elevated topography. Like, this is a big weather event for people living out in Northern California. We're just going to focus on the football component today, but this is like, it's now just like a hurricane hitting the U.S.
So, Mike, what map you brought up a map?
Yeah.
Tell us what we're looking at
here.
So
we're looking at the mean sea level pressure map. This is from Tropical Tidbits. And essentially, we're starting out like right around today. And you can see that this is the system out. The green shading is rainfall. The black contours is mean sea level pressure. And as you move out into the forecast mode, this is like midnight East Coast. This is the low pressure system we're talking about off the Pacific Northwest coast here. And as you move into the forecast Sunday afternoon, the thing that we're noticing here is this like fetch of enhanced rainfall right in through Northern California. And this is something called an atmospheric river. This is another one of those big weather terms that people like to talk about because they're really they bring in a lot of moisture that can produce these really heavy rain rates for parts of the world that doesn't see them. Like in the Western U.S., California, like they've had a number of atmospheric rivers events. But these are you need this particular synoptic event to happen to bring in the potential for some of these really high rainfall rates. And we're seeing that as we get into Sunday night. And then if I go into our football maps, right? This is our fantasy football. We can zoom in a little bit here. Hold on. You
can find these on our website if you go to weather tables, or not weather tables, sorry, our maps.
FFWeatherguys, and then if you go over to the
weather
tools section, you can literally do the same things here. We have U.S. West and wind and precip. I'm just looking at the precip map here, and you can see at the game time this little circle here. That's the stadium, right? This is the San Francisco 49ers home stadium, and it's red. And you can see in the underlying shading, there's a whole lot of pink there. And this is a 6-hour accumulation between 7 p.m. and 1 a.m. Eastern time Sunday night, and that's over an inch of rain here. The National Weather Service is predicting over a half an inch of rain for this particular game. I think I was just looking at it here. I put it down notes. The rain could be heavy at times, low around 55 Fahrenheit. It's going to be breezy with a southwest wind, 16 to 24 miles per hour, with gusts as high as 39 miles per hour. We're going to get into a little bit more detail about that. Me and Sean were talking about this. The chance of rain here is 100%, and we're looking between 1 and 2 inches of rain during the nighttime. This is a big time event.
Quantify what 1 to 2 inches of rain means. I mean, it's very hard to think, like, because you think about an inch and it's like, okay, but that is a ton of rain.
Yeah, the way that I do this is I convert it to snowfall, just because I like to. People can see snowfall and they understand it, right? Instead of rain.
Right.
So a very basic rule in meteorology for snowfall forecasting is if you have 1 inch of rain, you'll have about 10 inches of snow. So or I'm sorry, 12 inches of snow. You could do like a
10 to 12,
10 to
depending
12,
on the
yeah.
issue, yeah.
So you have 2
So
inches of
this
that.
is a 1 to 2 feet of snow. This is a storm. I mean, this is big.
Yeah, it's a mama.
Yeah.
It's a mammoth.
It is. And the other thing to keep in mind here is that the duration at which we're talking. So when you say, or when we say a half an inch of rain over the game time, that may be like, oh, a half an inch, that sounds like kind of a lot, but it doesn't sound like that big of an event. But remember, we're talking over a 3 to 4 hour time period. So when we're talking about half an inch to an inch of rain over a 3 to 4 hour time period, that is torrential downpours. Remember, we stated like there's this huge atmospheric river setting up. What that essentially means is there's a ton of water vapor coming up from the tropical Pacific, fueling the rain for this storm. And this can dump inches upon inches of rain over this 24-hour period over Northern California.
Yeah. And
so, Mike, what did you bring up here? Sorry.
Yeah. So no, I appreciate it. In addition to these rains, we're going to be seeing some pretty gusty conditions out, and we're looking at like a gust forecast map from the 6C HER. It's one of our higher resolution weather models that we take a look at. And whenever for the shading on the map, we look at like there's a lot of like pinks and reds on the map. These are like wind gusts over 30, 40 miles per hour. Like these are like tropical storm or some locations are over 60 miles per hour. We're looking at possible like hurricane force winds in some of these gusts at some of the higher elevations in California. Yeah. The thing is, right, Sean, as you go into game time, we're going to go like around 7 p.m. games. This is 7 p.m. here, so game time's an hour after this, right? We go to the hour here. The Bay region gets out of these really strong gusts during game time. So it's leading up into the game. It's going to be like a hurricane. As game time happens, these strong gusts are going to move out of the area.
Yeah, and that's one thing that because this was a borderline call for us, but the more we're looking at these models and the data, we are seeing that those windy conditions will likely subside a bit as we go into the game. Maybe the first quarter is going to be especially windy, but the second half of the game, we expect those really, really high gusts. We still may get gusts of 30 miles an hour, but those 40 mile an hour plus gusts probably will not be there for the second half of the game. But still, like Mike, you said, we're still looking at sustained winds, 20 to 25 miles an hour.
And gusts of 20, 30 mile per hour gusts. That's still
25,
significant.
Gusts, so
we're just
still
not,
substantial.
I think what's going to happen is we're going to move away from like the really like, I want to say this in a sensitive way, like the life-threatening wind gusts, right? Where trees can go down and, power outages happen. Those winds are going to be moving out of the area, but we're still going to have really extremely windy conditions behind it.
Yeah. And this is similar, like our Cleveland game last week, we forecasted some windy conditions, and this is similar kind of wind, maybe even a little bit higher here than what we saw in Cleveland this past week, which we did see had a little bit of an impact. But the big story here is the rain.
Right. And I wanted to quantify the rain event here, right? Because in football, we have a decent archive. We went back to back to the 90s. We looked at all the games, and I wanted to see how many times have we seen rainfall exceed a half an inch of rain in our archive. And
during the game,
right? That's right.
Right.
Colin, do you have any idea of how many games that could be?
I'm cheating, but I would not have known. I would have said I don't know.
It's not
30.
often. Yeah. So we have like hundreds of games in our archive. We've only seen 8 games where there's been rainfall over 0.4 of an inch. And we're talking about like 1 to 2 inches possible during this, like a game from heavy rain. So, 8 games, this is like obviously a 1 percentile type of event in weather statistic terms for football games. There's been 1 game that's seen a half an inch of rain, and that was November 16th to 2013, and that was in our archive. However, this game went through this was the Ravens at Chicago Bears game where winds were 20 miles per hour. We had a half inch of rain. The one thing that we didn't know in our archive when we wrote these notes was this game went into a 2-hour weather delay because of a tornado. So literally the game had all this bad weather early on, and then they had a 2-hour delay as this tornado went through Chicago in 2013 of that November. And literally the game stopped, and they brought it back on when weather wasn't a factor.
What were the scores of those 8 games? I assume low.
Yeah. So of those, if we remove that 1 game where they went to this weather delay because of this like bad tornado convective event, we've seen the range of outcomes from these types of like total points perspective is anywhere from 9 points to 36 points. There's actually four of the 7 games that had like these strong rainfall events were 36 points, but these games didn't have any wind associated with them. So we're looking at an upside of like under 40 points in this game. And I think Vegas over-under is what, 42.5 right now?
It was 42.5. I don't know if that changed over the last 24 hours, but I know DraftKings did have it at around 42.5.
Yeah. So I mean, this is like something that we haven't really seen in our archive, this particular event.
So, Mike, the big question is, you mentioned about weather delay. Do we need to worry about that? We did see this for the Kansas City Chiefs game, right? When they played, they did get a lot of rainfall, but they delayed that an hour plus, and they missed all of that rain, right? That we were forecasting. Is that something we need to worry about here?
Right. So the game, that's a great thing. This was something that still stings me because we had this event of rainfall. The National Weather Service was predicting like 0.4 inches of rain. However, it happened in a weather delay because of lightning. And if you look, right, a weather delay and lightning. Now,
Mike, I appreciate our conversation so much, and I hope our viewers do. I had no idea what you're about to talk about, that lightning is very regional.
Yes. Lightning in the U.S., and in the world for that matter, you often see higher density of lightning strikes in the U.S. over the plains and Midwest. You don't see as much in the West Coast, especially along the coastal California region. And Sean and I were talking about this. Like, why is this the case? What synoptically is happening in the Western U.S. compared to the plains and Midwest, where we see all those pinks and dark reds and blues, and even the southeastern U.S., where we see a lot of lightning strikes? This is what we're showing right now, like the density of lightning.
Yeah, I mean, and as you mentioned, this is very regional as far as a climatological perspective. And I think a way of phrasing this is you need very special ingredients to get convection or thunderstorms, which produces lightning. And over the West Coast, we don't have those ingredients coming together. Over the central U.S. or the southeastern U.S., there's higher potential if we get colder air and warmer air and a lot of water vapor, a lot of moisture moving into the area, which helps fuel these thunderstorms. We do not have those ingredients very often on the West Coast, especially the coastal regions, like coastal California. We just don't have those ingredients coming together very often to create a lot of thunderstorms. So with that being said, with this storm, we expect heavy rainfall, but the convective potential, or the potential for there to be thunderstorms and lightning, is incredibly low for this game. So that is not a concern for us, for it to be delayed in terms of any lightning risk. So we are not forecasting that at this time.
Yeah, so that reduces the probability of being this type of weather delay in the game, which means that they're going to be playing in this heavy rain. And just kind of reiterate what Sean said in a way that resonates well with me. Let's say you're trying to bake a cake, and you're trying to bake a cake without flour. It's not going to work, right? Flour is one of the most important ingredients to get that cake to fluff up. And if you look out in the plains and Midwest, those are the bakers. They got a lot of flour out there.
I like this analogy. I mean, you're right. Those like ingredients, right? If you don't have all the ingredients to make it, it's just not going to happen, right? And that's kind of what's happening here with lightning. We have the ingredients for rain, but we don't have the added ingredients for lightning and thunder.
Yeah. Let's talk about the main ingredients in a game. Player.
Wait, one second before we get there. I just want to say this one last thing that drives me nuts about television shows. Yeah. I know. I told Colin this. I always tell my wife Angela, whenever we see this happen, it just drives me nuts. If you watch like shows or movies that take place in the West Coast, and they always have like these like big storms that hit Seattle or parts of California, and you just see constant lightning in the background. It drives me nuts because I know that it doesn't happen there. So I'm like, look at these guys. Whoever did this whoever produced this movie or like directed it did not know weather, because they had these like lightning events going on in Seattle or coastal California, and there's literally no lightning there. Okay, I'm done. Rant's over. Go ahead.
You know what, Mike? I appreciate the nerdiness of that comment, but I like the ambiance and the scene of a movie. I don't think like that, but
I know.
I appreciate that you do. Going back to being a baker, you got to have ingredients, like you said. I like that analogy. And the main ingredients, like I said, in a football game are the players. So what are we seeing this week for the impact of this game?
Yeah, I mean, and we do expect the impacts to be far and wide in this one, especially with the consistency and the intensity of the rain. We have our two QBs. We have Jimmy Garoppolo, who I think still has a questionable tag right now, but we expect him to start. And then we have Carson Wentz. Those are going to be our two QBs at the helm here in this game. And we know that typically in QBs even if it's just rain, let alone the wind, we know that those fantasy point totals and just offensive production in general go down. We saw this with what Mike was talking about with the total points scored, right?
Yeah.
And on average, we're looking at around in the mid 30s for total points per game. What that means is we don't have a lot of offensive output. So that's going to be reflected for this game on Sunday. And I think the highlight for me is looking at some of these stats with Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo has played in 3 games with rain, and his average yards per game drops around 70 yards when there is inclement weather. Yeah. So, I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo is not necessarily this prolific passer, but we do see him getting impacted. The stats are statistically significant when he plays in rain. He's just not able to complete anything consistently or downfield. Carson Wentz is a little bit of a different story. He seems to do okay in rainy conditions. He's still around his career average. But the thing to keep in mind is that the passing defense for the San Francisco 49ers has been pretty stellar of late, only giving up around 197 yards passing over the last 3 games. So the picture I'm trying to paint for everybody here is I don't expect big things from our QBs. I think drives are going to stall. I think they're going to have trouble getting the ball downfield. And we're going to see a lot of these drives sputter out a little bit early.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably going to trickle down to the wide receivers as well, right? I mean, you limit your upside of your quarterbacks. How do you get your wide receiver production high?
Exactly. And so we did our analysis on fantasy production for our wide receivers. And across the board, as far as targets, completions, yards, all the offensive stats for receivers go down by 20% or more. It's just we're not able to consistently get the ball downfield and sustain the drives in order for those receivers to build up those numbers. Now, I will say I think the exception to this rule in this game is Deebo Samuel. Now, Mike, you have Deebo Samuel in our league, and you mentioned you're not excited about starting him, but I think he's going to get the target volume. I mean, who else are you going to in that offense with Kittle out? Ayuk has not been producing. He's not been the breakout candidate people have wanted. I think everything's going to be closer to the line of scrimmage, but especially if you're in a PPR league, I think Deebo Samuel, I think he has a solid floor in this one. I wouldn't necessarily expect him to have another 180-yard game, which we've seen him do earlier this year.
He's been amazing. He's been keeping my team afloat.
He's been a top 10 wide receiver, essentially, right? And Garoppolo goes to him. There's definitely chemistry there.
Yeah.
So I think you're okay if you need to start him. On the other side of the ball, I'm struggling with this one. I would say Michael Pittman, right? Because we know there's some injuries on the receiving core for Indianapolis. Carson Wentz is going to need to throw the ball to somebody. It may be like a Moali Cox, one of the tight ends, but I think Pittman's going to get some targets as well. It's just he's been a little bit more inconsistent of late in terms of his performance and the number of targets.
So we brought up Deebo Samuel, and this is a personal question for me to ask you guys because I've been struggling with this all week, right? My team, I'm worried about him this week. It's the bipocalypse. I started Tim Patrick already, who did nothing for me. I have the option to play Bryan Edwards, Las Vegas wide receiver, and can flex him in and over Deebo. He hasn't had a touchdown yet this year, but I feel like it's coming eventually. He's been playing well when he gets the targets. Do I take the risk of Deebo in the weather game, or do I flex him out for like a mid-level guy like Bryan Edwards, where we've seen a lot of change in Las Vegas with the departure of Gruden?
I would say this: if you need big play, especially if Patrick laid a dud for you, I think Edwards maybe has a higher potential for getting you a higher ceiling.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
But if you need that volume, if you need a steady 10 to 15 fantasy points without the 20+ ceiling, then I have to imagine Deebo is going to get targets in this game.
Okay.
The Indianapolis Colts are, I think, ranked 20th in terms of their passing defense. They're giving up around 256 yards a game. So I think they're going to be able to get the ball out, at least on these shorter routes to Deebo, maybe some wide receiver screens. I just don't expect him to go off for 150 yards plus.
Yeah. I'm worried about the downside risk in this game for the total over and under point. There's possibility. I don't really say this often, But there is a chance we see like less than 10 points in this game. It's not a high probability outcome, but it's a tail distribution event, and it's possible with the weather events going to happen.
It absolutely is, and so that's why I say it limits the upside of a Debo. But who else are you going to? Who else is Jimmy G going to go to in this offense? I think he's at least going to get a few targets. I haven't looked at Edwards' numbers recently, but I know he's been emerging. Him and Ruggs as well have been kind of emerging with Derek Carr, because Derek Carr has been, other than a few games, which are the weeks in which I started him, other than a few weeks, he's been pretty solid this year. So I think you have a little bit maybe of a. I mean, I think Edwards definitely has the ceiling there, but I think Debo.
Edwards is basically half of Debo Samuels. He has half the receptions, almost half the targets, almost half the yards. But his yards per reception is a little bit better. So
the question is, do you play a mid-level, like a wide receiver 3 or 4 over Debo in this game? Is that's the question we're asking right now? Do we flex in one of these lower level tier guys instead of a guy who's been a consistent fantasy producer on our squad?
I mean, it's tough, because part of me wants to say, hey, like you mentioned, this game could end up in less than 10 points. Because this could be a 10 to 20 point game.
Brutal.
But then another part of me is saying, well, they're at least going to pass the ball at some point during this game. It's not going to be 100% run, although we'll talk more about the running game here in just a second. And who else is Jimmy G going to be going to here? I mean, we know that he could be a short yardage guy, a long yardage guy, and I think he's at least going to get some volume, especially if you're in a PPR, to not completely bust for you.
I mean, they could
What about go ahead, Mike.
No, go finish your thing, because
I was going to switch to the other side. What about the Colts wide receivers?
Yeah, that's perfect.
What are we seeing? What are we seeing there? I think Pittman, but we got the defense for the 49ers defense, but I like Pittman. I think Pittman could have a possibly decent game.
I mean, the 49ers defense is the second best defense against the pass in to opposing wide receivers. They're a tough defense to play. So and Carson Wentz in a weather game, Sean already mentioned, you limit the upside there. He doesn't really have much upside in my opinion. I think he's not a great quarterback, but I don't feel confident in playing Pittman this week. I mean, I feel less confident. I would rather play. I think Debo Samuel is my level of guy where I would consider playing in this matchup. But that's just me.
Like out of these two teams
for wide receivers.
For wide, I know what you meant. Yeah, that's it. That's it. You have all these wide receivers. You're only going to say possibly Debo.
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, Pittman's going to get Pittman has the same argument here, because I think T.Y. Hilton's not going to play this game. He didn't practice on Friday, so it's going to be like a Pittman. But they do have some of the bigger tight ends on the Colts. Like Mo Alley Cox is going to have some targets here. We see tight ends usually have a safe floor in these weather events. At least though they're used more, they might have a little bit more usage. And so that's for me. I'm for Colts, they have these tight ends on the squad. I just feel less confident in starting in those.
Yeah, I mean, Pittman has been he's a little bit of a polarizing player too. I mean, there's been games like last week against the Texans. He only had 3 targets, 2 receptions for 35 yards. But then he's had multiple games with 10 plus targets, 1 game for over 100 yards. He only has 1 TD on the season. So I think his touchdown upside is definitely capped here. Yeah. It's just, who is Carson Wentz going to in this game? If he makes Pittman his primary receiver, he may have a similar kind of floor as a Debo Samuel, but it's just not as likely, right? We're still a little bit unsure of how he's going to be used in this game plan. I personally think that this is all going to run through Jonathan Taylor.
Hell yeah.
And then Pittman's going to have it's just going to have, some targets here and there to try to move the ball, but I think it's going to be limited.
Yeah, it's going to be this is what Sean likes to call the ground and pound attack. Literally
ground and pound. Yeah, I mean, rushing, I mean, statistically, that's just what it's looking like here. I mean, for the offense or the San Francisco offense, they're ranked 9th in rushing attempts per game at 29. They're 12th in rushing yards per game at around 122. And Indianapolis is similar. They have around 27 attempts per game and around 124 yards per game. And then on the other side, the defenses, can the defenses do anything against this running game? And the San Francisco is ranked 18th. They're giving up around 113 yards, and Indianapolis is right in that range as well, giving up 111. So there's potential for the running game to become a major component of this game. And that's what we expect. We usually see rushing totals increase in these games. I am all for Jonathan Taylor. I think he's gotten, 15 to 20 carries per game. He's shown he can get involved in the passing game for short passes and breaking those out. I think he is going to have a solid floor and a solid volume in this game.
Yeah, I mean, on the other side of the ball, Eli Mitchell is back, and I think they're going to try to run through most of the offense through him in the San Fran game. And for me, I feel I'm leaning here that San Francisco is going to win this game. I just think it's going to be a slop fest. I think San Fran has the edges, especially when you get a team from like the Eastern U.S., middle half Eastern, coming out west, or Sunday night game. They're going to be tired.
And Colts are a domed stadium too.
They play in protection. The Colts, right?
Yeah. So team.
Yeah, right. So you got a lot of things that go against the Colts in weather sense for this game. So so in my opinion here, while Taylor seems like he's going to get the volume, he's going to be a safe play with the volume. If they fall behind and it's a slop fest, and let's say 49ers get up by 2 touchdowns, there's a chance here that Nyheim Hines gets more involved. Especially, you don't think he's going to get?
I don't think that's going to. I cannot imagine. I just don't see. I think the probability of any team getting up by 2 touchdowns in this one
is low.
Can it happen? Sure, but it's.
If there's a defensive score, it's possible.
I will say that all the lines are calling this game almost even.
Yeah.
It was a 5.5 point opening for the 49ers. Now it's at 4 to 3.5, depending on which book you're looking at. I don't know. I do think the edge is 49ers, but I mean, I think it's basically an even game, especially with the weather. That all our stats that's you're spouting off about defense ranking and stuff don't include a game like this of weather.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be anyone's game, and I think that's what the spread is showing.
Yeah, exactly. And with just the rushing, I think they know they're going with a game plan. The coaches know that this is going to be a rainy game. They're not completely oblivious to that. They know that the weather is going to be really inclement. They're going to build a game plan to ensure that they don't need to be passing the ball 45 times in this one. They're going to trust their running backs, and they're going to get that volume. I think the time is going to go by very quickly in this one. I think the drives are going to be I don't think there's going to be long sustained drives. However, for the series, the drive series, I think just a lot of time is going to be taking off the clock during these, just because they're going to be running a lot. It's going to be a slower moving game in terms of not a lot of big plays.
Yeah, I mean, when you get into that now, like with these drives stalling, if you do get on the other side of the field and you have a potential kicker, a field goal attempt, what are we thinking about for the kickers here? Are we worried about this heavy rain with like pretty much 20-mile-per-hour winds coming out of the southwest? I'm trying to bring up Levi Stadium here.
Well, I think we got to be worried about the kickers.
I think so too.
Initially, for one, first reason is they're the backups.
Yeah, Blankenship is out. So is Robbie Gould, I believe. I think they're both on IR right now. And so I can't see the coaches having a lot of confidence in long field goal attempts for either of these guys. In these games, when we have weather with high wind and rain, when you get beyond a 35, 40-yard field goal kick, we're looking at a 20% plus reduction in the success rate of those field goals. So, and also in the number of attempts, because the coaches know, right, I'm not going to put my field goal kicker out there to attempt a 55-yarder if I know that the weather's probably going to impact that kick. I'm going to do a pooch punt. I'm just going to punt it and try to pin my opponent back and just trust my defense. And so I think I think you're okay if they're going for some of the shorter ones, but I don't anticipate a lot of long field goals being attempted in this game. So I think the upside is limited and you don't have a lot of touchdowns, so it's not like you can even count on them for the extra points.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it's going to be it's a tough. I would go to set other options in redraft for kickers.
Yeah. So
sure.
What's Mike? I see you have something up here. What is this with DraftKings?
Yeah, where are we going? Daily fantasy, right? Most daily fantasy games are the 1 and 4 o'clock. That's our standard league, really. But there is an option to do a captain. They call it what do they call it?
Captain Showdown. Yeah. So
Captain Showdown.
You pick one captain, you get 1.5 amplifier points for that captain who you pick, and then everyone else you flex underneath it. So
first, I want to shout out John. Thanks for the shout out there, Red Bar. I appreciate that, you saying hi to me. Yeah. So, Captain Showdown.
Yeah. So I figured this would be a good thing to kind of go through. It's 8:20 p.m. game slot. It's a weather game, so this is where we can pick from only Indianapolis Colts players or San Francisco 49 players, and
that's correct. There's only one game at 8:20.
Right. There's only one game at 8:20. It's gonna
like that lot.
It's gonna be a bomb cyclone hitting the game. So this is where we're gonna go. Right. This is the options that DraftKings gives us. We could. They obviously have a different salary here. The total salary point for this is 50,000. We have enough in our pool to spend. So we could, obviously the top option here in DraftKings is Jonathan Taylor. He's been really good this year so far. One of the best running backs in the league. He's averaging 20.4 points a game. Then you can see the remainder guys are quarterbacks, and then you get down to Debo, and then you get into the lower tier guys after that. So in a big weather event, usually the running backs have a solid floor. And this is Sean's argument. Jonathan Taylor seems like the most logical play here. So the question is, do we chalk up Jonathan Taylor as our captain in this game when we set up our lineup, or do we go into the lesser of the variants and we find someone down in the bottom middle pack where we could potentially pick for our captain? So that's a question. My argument here, this is going to be a very wet game. There's going to be wind. This is a grass field. It's going to be muddy, right? Do we decide to pick the better of the two defenses as our captain to get that potential variance in our lineup, and let's play the 49ers defense for our captain? That's where I'm leaning towards, but we're obviously relying on a low-scoring game with turnovers and a defensive score to make this actual come to fruition for the defense.
I think that's key, right? We definitely need several turnovers and probably a pick six or a fumble recovery for a touchdown or something like that to really make a mark. Because I can't imagine, Jonathan Taylor getting less than, 10, 11, 12 points in this one potentially. So that is the big question. Although like you mentioned, Mike, a lot of people are going to be picking Taylor as their captain, right, to get those increased point totals. So do we go against a little bit of the grain here, especially it being a weather game? We know there's probably not going to be a lot of points scored in going with this defense. I mean, you're starting to convince me a little bit here that maybe we need to take a chance on a defense here.
I don't know. We have a fantasy guru here. I just, the man, the legend, Mr. Congo Zicki, what do we do here?
Where's the guru?
What would you do here, Colin, in this event?
It's better to be lucky than good. Honestly, I when you posed that question, I didn't even know if my mind would have comprehended playing a defense at the 1.5 point escalator.
Yeah, it seems ridiculous.
It seems ridiculous at first, but it's such an intriguing thing that I actually am going to put a lineup in concept, because either they're low scoring. I mean, you're going to get the points if they don't score. It could be a defense heavy game. I just think about the last game in my head was the Washington football team game where they only scored 9 points total on that game in rain with a grass field. Jonathan Taylor does seem like the obvious answer, and that you would want that. But I think with everything that we're saying, I trust our analytics. I trust our product. So I think we play the defense and see what happens.
All right, let's throw him in there for our captain. I think we still need to play Jonathan Taylor because he's obviously a safe floor, right?
Yeah.
This was more of a captain question. And with the 49ers defense as our captain, it's certainly going to be like a low probability outcome that other people are going to use the same type of attack here with this. Yeah. So Mike, we all agree. What's up?
Your DraftKings balance is a little embarrassing.
Yeah. It's been a struggle. I've been holding on. I haven't added any money this year in, but I play 10-cent games, man. I win $1 here, I'm happy. So this will get me through 26 weeks.
Yeah, so let's put Taylor in our first flex. Okay. I think we all agree.
Yeah, Taylor's first flex. Now this is where the thing is getting a little bit more interesting. We still have $34,000 left in our budget.
I think we got to go with the other running back on the other side in Mitchell here.
Yep. We got to play the other running back.
Even though I know the 49er front is tough, I think he's going to get the volume. He's going to have the floor in this one. I expect him to get the market share of the carries, although I think Jermichael Hasty is coming back. And there is a lot of there's some ambiguity in that backfield, but I think Mitchell's going to be the main guy.
Okay. We've been talking a lot about Deebo Samuel. as a volume play. Who else are going to throw to?
What's his cost for Debo? What do we got?
Debo is
96.
9,600. Okay.
I lost Debo.
You had him, man. He's right there.
He's right there.
There you go.
Oh, there we go. Sorry, my screen was messing up here. So, okay, 9,600 for Debo in the flex there. So now we're getting down to 2 last flex. We have 8,000 per player we could do.
I think we got to pick a tight end here with the short passes, the dumps.
Yeah, and I think Mo Alley Cox is that possible guy there. I mean, we've seen him leapfrog in the tight end rankings here for the Colts.
Right.
So I mean, this is the play here, unless we want to do 2 quarterbacks and try to rely on a touchdown. I mean, I don't think we can afford 2 quarterbacks. By the way. You're right. We can't. We can do 1 quarterback and the other defense. I mean, there's a number of options we can go down this route here.
Yeah, I would say. I mean,
going with another defense in my mind. Normally that'd be counterintuitive because they're going to cancel each other out at the end of the day. One's going to have but
I mean, we do have the touchdown upside with Cox. I mean, he did have a touchdown in his last game against Houston. He had 2 against Miami. I think he should be a relatively cheap option here.
Yeah, he's $5,200.
At $5,200. And then, fortunately, unfortunately, the QBs are still going to get, I have to imagine, some points here. So we have to make a decision. Yeah. Well, let's see here. We can afford Garoppolo, or where is Wentz? We can also afford. So we can afford both of these guys.
Yeah.
This one's tough because here's the side, right? Garoppolo has obviously struggled in rain games. When he played the Washington football team in Washington last time, again, the total score was 0-9. And he has traditionally thrown for under 150 yards in these rainy games. But he's going up against a little bit of a weaker defense in the Colts as opposed to Wentz, who plays a little bit better in weather games. But that San Francisco front, their defense, especially in the passing game, has been a little bit more stellar of late. So where do you guys lean here?
I lean at Garoppolo. I mean, that I don't feel great about it, but that's my lean.
Yeah, I think he's got, with the players that are left on the board, I think he's going to get the most points out of the rest. I mean, I think.
Yeah.
And we have the money.
I'm outvoted. I was actually going to go Wentz here, but because he's.
I share Mike's comment about Wentz. I just think he's not a great quarterback.
I just have a hard time trusting him. I do. I don't think he's even in the NFL.
Garoppolo. You could trust Garoppolo?
I feel better about him.
More.
I mean, exactly. He's a very handsome man. How can you not trust him?
That's your argument, Mike. He's very handsome.
No.
I mean, he's been.
It's a defensive matchup here. I think, in my opinion, the 49ers defense is more of a stout defense against the pass, when compared to the Colts. Colts have just kind of fallen off this year. The mid-level pack. I think Garoppolo is the easier matchup in this one. That's why I lean more towards him, because I also trust Deebo Samuel more than I trust Michael Pittman. That's just me as an athlete.
My argument is we've only seen Jimmy Garoppolo throw for 2 TDs only one time this year. The last 3 games for Carson Wentz, he had 2 TDs against Miami, 2 against Baltimore, and 2 against Houston, with over 400 yards against Baltimore. So I know that was kind of an outlier game, but I feel like he has a little bit of a safer floor. I think Garoppolo.
Okay.
I feel like he has a safer floor. I know the defensive front for the 49ers is tough, but if I'm voted against off the island here, Survivor style, then I will go Garoppolo.
Sean, you're going to never be voted off of my island. You know that.
Well, I mean,
don't say that, Colin.
In the end, both these quarterbacks, I think, are going to throw sub 200 yards, and maybe have a touchdown with a couple picks. To me, this is a moot point because I don't like either of them. So if you want to play Wentz, we can throw him in there.
Let's go Wentz. Sean had a good argument. There's some stats there, and we still got to. I hate leaving salary. That's one thing that, like, mentally I get over, but I have an issue when I leave remaining money. But it's really not about maximizing the dollars you spend in DFS. It's maximizing the potential.
Right.
And you just always got to remember that.
We're optimizing on fantasy points.
Yeah, and it's not optimizing using all your salary.
Right.
So just, for some people, be careful there. I mean, there's a mental block for me I have to move past. I see $1,000 there, and I'm like, oh, wait, should I pay up for someone because I didn't play? But again, I was going to say like a test. You go with your first answer. I like this lineup. Submit.
Yeah, and there's only limited because even if we have multi-cax that's really low there, but that only gives us 6,200, and I just don't really see any other options. Maybe if you want to play Hines here with the passing upside, but I just don't trust it in this one.
I like this. I think we submit. I think we just let it go, let it fly.
All right, let's do it. I like it.
All right, guys.
Well done.
We're entering that in, and
okay, guys.
We're good. So that was a good session there. I think we took the risk on the defense as our captain, but
I like it.
I think that's a nice thing when you talk about variance in lineups. Most people are going to put Jonathan Taylor in there. So honestly, I'm rooting for a Jonathan Taylor bust game because it will make our team that much better. But we also are playing him in case for the hedge. So
yeah, but I think everybody's playing him to some. I don't think there's going to be a lot of people out there just completely don't play Taylor. Yeah. So I think you're right. We're kind of hoping for a bust.
Yeah.
So to summarize our show, guys, if we're at that point, I mean, we are seeing a big weather event, not just a normal fall storm or something. This is going to be impactful on many levels, especially for us in this game. But there, like you said, Mike, there's going to be some societal impacts here. So we hope for the best, and we hope everyone stays safe out there.
Yeah.
But for our product, we're seeing a big impact. The Colts San Francisco game on Sunday night, we're thinking it's going to be low scoring. We think that it'll be defense heavy game, and for us who are trying to dabble in betting, for us, I say me and everyone else, but sports betting is big. I would say the under's a safe play. Like we said, 7 games with rain like this.
None of them hit 40 points.
No, 36 was the median, and almost the average. I mean, when you look at them, there was 5 games with 36 points and then lower. I don't know. Did I miss anything? I'm excited to watch Sunday Night Football for the weather.
Yeah, I know. It's going to be an exciting game. The only thing I'll mention is if you kind of want a summary of some of the things that we talked about in today's show, if you didn't catch the entire show, we are going to be posting a blog probably within the next hour here. And that can be found on our website under blogs for the Week 7 fantasy impacts. So if you want to read that over, take a look at some of the stats that we have, that may be helpful.
Yeah, and our website is FFWeatherguys.com. You can follow us on social media at FFWeatherguys. We'll be tweeting out throughout the day and tomorrow as the storm, I don't know what the proper term is commences, starts, develops.
That's all good. Yeah.
That works, Comp.
This is going to be one of the top weather event of the year, I think, guys. I mean, we don't see these types of events manifest in football in our archives, so the potential is there to be a historical event. So I'm excited to watch it.
Well, great show. Always fun talking to you. Thank you to all of our viewers, followers, and we look forward to Sunday Night Football.
There you go.
Good luck. Have a good weekend, everyone. Good luck.